All right, for this next section, we're going to talk about um, how life can change, really talk about kind of macro evolution and how we can get these bigger changes. And so this idea that has come up in the 70s called Evo Devo, which is evolutionary biologists and developmental biologists on trying to take those two different schools and to mirror those to see how life changed on this planet. And what you're seeing here is an addition of another group, which is the ECO, which would be the genetics and genomics group. So what you're trying to do is try to figure out how can we do it. And we're gonna really look at the genes and how we talked about it before, and how these can change body form. So there's really two ways it can happen: change in rate, and then change in timing, and then change in spatial patterns. So rate and timing is just how fast something goes or how slow something goes, and then spatial pattern is how different parts are associated with the other parts. Are they on top of each other, next to each other, things like that. And so we want to look at these changes and how we can get new body forms. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll look at the first one, the rate and the timing. The couple of words I want you to know: heterochrony is really kind of the biological definition of changing in rate and timing. And you're seeing that on the right-hand side. So here we have two organisms. We have a chimpanzee, and then we also on the bottom we have humans. And what they're doing is they're comparing skulls. Now, I'm not saying that we're the same. And if you look at the pictures of the two fetus skulls, you can see there's some differences. But the differences are a lot more pronounced in the adults. And what they really think has happened in primate evolution is actually the earliest primates, things like lemurs, have almost a fox-like face. And what we're seeing is that kind of jaw structure is pulling back. And what we see in chimpanzees is that extended jaw actually happens a little bit later in life. So as babies, their skulls are pretty round, and then that jaw starts to jut out as they become more and more closer to an adult. And what they might the thought process is in humans, that might have slowed down. And one of the reasons we talk about that, why would a smaller jaw make a difference? We do believe that is one of the reasons that we have a larger brain. With a larger jaw means you have larger jaw muscles that surround the skull, and it doesn't allow the skull to get larger. And so this is the idea of rate and timing, that you just are slowing down a process and it makes major changes. The other idea is pediomorphosis, and this is when you have an adult that actually holds on to juvenile characteristics, and we're seeing that on the bottom. This is a salamander, and typically these guys would crawl out of the water, and that's usually driven by food. Well, it turns out if there's enough food in the water, why leave? And so what happens is they don't lose their gills, and they just stay in the water. And so again, look quite a bit different than a regular salamander. And these are different ways that you can change body form, rate, and timing. The other way is changes in spatial patterns. And so here we have homeotic genes or positioning genes. And you can see they're all kind of marked. And so in humans and in flies, we have some of this very similar type genes for things. Now you can see that ours is more complicated. And we have a combination of 4 different Hox genes. But what it does is, depending on the organism and how they are positioned, it tells you exactly where things belong. And you can see up on the front is the green, and in the back is the yellow. So that's kind of telling things on where they should be. And what happens is that It allows for our patterning. They've done studies on fruit flies, and nobody gets upset when you do things like this, where they altered the genes, and they've actually grown flies who obviously don't survive, but with two heads or two back ends by switching the gene. So really, it's telling all these cells where they belong and where they need to position at. So by changing those, you can get quite a bit different body structures. And then evolution of development. We can look at two different things under this. We can look at change in gene sequence and then change in gene regulation. So we'll start with the gene sequence, and here we're going to talk about a type of position gene, which is a Hox gene. Here we have the UBX gene that forms legs. And what they have found is if they change that sequencing, they can actually reduce the number of legs. So the green one does not suppress the legs, but the pink one actually does. And so we can go from an early crustacea that has multiple legs, and then you get up to a fly, which then has only 6 legs. So again, these little changes in gene structure have big consequences in the phenotypes that we see. And the gene itself doesn't necessarily have to change. It can be just the regulation of it on when you turn it on and off. And so like stickleback fish, they're called sticklebacks because they have little spines on their vertical surface that is there to protect them from other fish. And what we find is lake fish that don't have any predators, they don't grow the spines. And, at first it's like, well, what happened? Did they lose the gene for it? And it turns out they still have the gene, but they don't need it. And so again, when we talk about energy and there is a selective pressure, if you're not growing the spines, you can use that for something else. And so what we want you to understand is, again, that the gene is there. It is just being turned off. And that gene actually doesn't just deal with the spines. It actually even changes the structure on the mouth and showing you on the bottom. So small little changes in how we turn genes on and off can also have changes on body form. So it doesn't take a lot to get these forms to change. So what we want you to understand, kind of a bigger picture item, and I didn't want to make another video for just a couple slides, but evolution is not goal oriented. Natural selection, evolution is really for survival, nothing more. And when I talk about goal oriented, I mean that there is no, we're not shooting for some perfection. We're just trying to survive. So what we find is a lot of times the things that show up are new or different. So here I want to talk about two other ideas. One is evolutionary novelties. How we can get new phenotypes is really just kind of a luck of the draw. And it turns out sometimes things are kind of what we call pre-adapted to do something else. So feathers on the bird, that's a red-shafted flicker. They're actually found around here as one of our larger woodpeckers. Fairly rare, don't see them too much anymore. But what I want you to know about this bird is that, or any bird in general, is we don't believe feathers actually evolved for flight. We believe they evolved for warmth. These guys are endotherms and homeotherms and the higher metabolism. So we believe that feathers were actually designed at first for warmth. And if you look at an early feather, the question was, how helpful can they be for flight? And again, they weren't, but they were for warmth. And then what we find out is they are pre-adapted or actually very good at flight because they're lightweight and all these things, and allowed birds to actually evolve and get off the ground. Now, that was not what birds were trying to do. That was not the goal, but it is a niche that was not being filled. And so they filled it. And on the right-hand side, this is the different eyes that we see in the different species. And what I need you to know again is we don't believe that eyes evolved for vision necessarily. What they are is there's a gene and a pigment that is necessary. It's the PAX6 gene is the gene that actually is involved in vision, and opsin is the actual pigment. And we do believe that the pigmented cells were photoreceptors, and it's really about detecting light and dark. So again, that was the goal, and this is especially important for organisms that need to hide and need to stay out of the light because they don't want to be eaten, and or things that eat photosynthetic stuff like sea jellies. It might be good to have some light and dark sensors, because if your food is photosynthetic, it's going to be in the light, and so if you can detect that, you can move toward it. So again, this is kind of the idea where it was made for one thing and used somewhere else. The term for that is exaptation. Exaptation. Okay, so again, not goal oriented. And then probably a very good example of this is evolutionary trends. And so I love this example. Here we have horses, and we have a very good fossil record of the horse. Horses actually evolved in North America, went extinct in North America, and the only wild living ones are in Asia, and that's not even necessarily true now. What they're finding out is even what they thought was the Mongolian or Przewalski's horse actually is bred with some domestic horses, so there may not be a true wild horse on the planet anymore. But anyway, to get the idea, we have good fossil records. Actually, the mammal section of the Natural History Museum has a good thing on this. But the idea here is horses. Actually, today, horses are large. They actually run, each foot has one toe, and they are grass eaters. But reality is their ancestors, the earliest horses, were very, very small, kind of the size of a medium dog. They had 3 or 4 toes on their feet, depending on front or back. Actually, the original animal toes are like us, are 5 digits, but they've been slightly reduced. And these guys were what we call browsers. And what a browser is somebody that actually eats leaves off of trees. And so what we're looking at is all the different relatives of horses, some that have done well over time and then went extinct, some, you know, and you can see in the yellow the ones that we believe led to the modern horse, Equus. But I want you to make sure you understand that the horses weren't sitting around thinking, oh, I'm small, I have too many toes, and I really want to eat grass. That was not the goal. What the goal was is survival. And so what's happened is they saw a change in their habitat. Horses evolved in a forested area. So being small was good, so you can get between the trees. Eating leaves was good because that's what you had to eat. There was no grass. And the toes gave you stability. Whereas as the forest started to die out and you got more and more grasslands, you had to have some adaptations. So the size is important. The larger you are, the harder it is for prey to take you down. So size is good. And the losing of the toes is actually for speed. You're going to be running away from predators, and it turns out up on your one toe is actually more efficient. You think about sprinters in track and field, is they get up on their mark, you know, they get up on their toes. And that is a more efficient way to run. And then the teeth have changed over time. They went from, again, chewing on leaves to chewing on grasses. So we see differences in their cusps. You can see the flat part of the teeth to help grind grass. So again, I want to make sure you understand, not goal oriented. It's just that's what they've become.